Happy Halloween and welcome once again to Storytime with Oliver Covington. This week's story is called Barnaby Underbed, and it was originally published in my book stories. Enjoy, and please consider liking and subscribing. Mary Alice's 5-year-old hand was held fast by the older boy taking her trick-or-treating. She was resplendent in a pink fairy princess gown complete with gossamer wings and a very sparkly fairy princess tiara. Her fairy princess wand, complete with glowing star on the end, was tucked into her sash as she hefted the big sack full of candy in her free hand. The older boy named Barnaby Underbed, and Mary Alice looked both ways before crossing the street and then proceeded to make the rounds. Mary Alice bravely walked up to each door and rang the bell and loudly announced, "Trick or treat." The nice people on the other side of the door would absolutely fuss over how adorable Mary Alice was, and then drop a handful of candy into her sack. Barnaby would stand back a bit and let Mary Alice be the star. When she would sometimes be asked where her parents were, little Mary Alice would say they were working, but her friend Barnaby offered to take her out trick-or-treating. This would usually elicit a response of such a nice young man. If they asked where his costume was, Mary Alice would giggle and say he's wearing it. And they would link hands and skip off down the street. They trick-or-treated for hours as the sky grew darker and the street lamps began to light. Every kid in the neighborhood was out and everyone was having a grand old time. Mary Alice and Barnaby went to every single house in the neighborhood, but saved Mr. Rafferty's for last. Mr. Rafferty, the youth pastor at her family's church, usually got a big crowd because he would hand out full-size candy bars along with hot cocoa, and occasionally a small drink for the parents. They waited until all the other kids started to go in for the night, and the crowds began to die down. One by one, the porch lights started to go off when Mary Alice cautiously walked up to Mr. Rafferty's door and rang the bell. She was shaking like a leaf and was about to turn and run when the door opened and Mr. Rafferty looked down on her and smiled. "Well, hello, Mary Alice. Don't you look pretty tonight?" Those were practically the same words he said to her when he slid his hand up under her dress and touched her between the legs. When she tried to tell, all the grown-ups said she was making up stories. That was the night Barnaby crawled out from under her bed and comforted her and told her he believed her, and that he would take care of it. The tears started to come up, and then Barnaby stepped forward. "Is it him?" He looked at Mr. Rafferty and then at Mary Alice, who just nodded her head. Mr. Rafferty was about to question who the young man was when Barnaby stepped closer and peeled off his seemingly normal face, revealing a snarling, dripping, mucus-covered mouth full of rows upon rows of teeth. He turned to Mary Alice, his yellow eyes narrowed to slits. "Wait right here." He pushed Mr. Rafferty into the house and slammed the door. Mary Alice waited patiently, digging through her candy bag, deciding what to eat first, while soul-ripping screams came from inside the house. There were a few loud, wet slaps against the small windows on the front door, and then everything went quiet. A few moments later, the door opened and Barnaby Underbed emerged, adjusting the normal face back over his real one. "He won't touch you again," he said in a quiet, soothing voice. Mary Alice smiled and held out her hand, which Barnaby grabbed gleefully, and the two of them went happily skipping down the street, debating which candy was the best.